Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the MAG and welcome to Art Speaks tonight. We are very happy to have Megan Bylsma with us shortly, and we have many people participating involved. I am just going to go through a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. And then I will properly introduce Megan to us. We have Suzanne Hermey is also with us with the Arts Council. This is a collaborative program between the Red Deer Arts Council and the Red Deer Museum and Art Gallery, and we are happy to be able to sponsor it, to have ATB sponsoring it for free. And all of the sessions this year and last year were free because ATB has provided a sponsorship. So they really want to support the arts, and we're grateful for that. So before I begin with some upcoming events, I just want to start off with some land acknowledgements. In the spirit of reconciliation, we acknowledge that we live, work, and play on the traditional territories of Treaty 6, the gathering place of the Cree, Saulteaux, Blackfoot, Dene, and Nakota Sioux, located north of the Red Deer River. We also live on the traditional grounds of Treaty 7, the gathering place of the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Siksika, Kainai, Piikani, as well as the Nakota and Tsuut'ina Nations, the Métis, and all the people who make their homes in Treaty 7 region south of the Red Deer River. So tonight we have Megan Bylsma from the Red Deer College. She is going to be joining us, and she's going to be talking about My 5-Year-Old Draws Like That, the invisible British influence on landscape art that we all experience. So we're going to learn a little bit about the perception of good landscape art through the study of art history. So we're very happy to have her with us. She is just getting her slide presentation ready, and we do have some upcoming events that I want to promote to you. So we have coming up this Saturday with our Yahatinda exhibit, local artist from Lacombe, Arto Jajarian. He's a photographer who's photographed the Yahatinda's ranch for over 6 years, and so he will be doing his artist talk at 2 o'clock on Saturday, January 29th. It is in person, but we will also be live streaming it, so you can jump in live, or you can show up at the museum and listen to Arto talk about his experience and the history of Yahatinda. For the MAG sampler, it has been postponed. We had it scheduled for January 23rd, and we've postponed it. It is a painting workshop with Susan Wilger, one of our artists who is also exhibiting right now at the gallery in our West Country. And so she's going to be doing a workshop called Finding a Focus, from sketch to painting. So it is not an intermediate painting workshop. It is somewhere you have to have some painting skills. You're going to bring your own paints. We will provide a canvas, and she's going to be teaching us about the design of composing a good landscape design. Then for the next Art Speaks on February 23rd, we have Arto Jajarian again. He's going to be talking about his artistic practice as a photographer. And then we've also started a knitting club once a month. It started last night with Caitlin Carbonic for 2 sessions for January and February, and she's teaching on knitted lace. And then after that, in March and April, we have Melanie Burnt teaching about cable knit. So even though it's a 4-month session, you can jump in any month for $20 a month and just jump in for one of the sessions if you like. So you can learn more about that too. I am going to turn it over to Suzanne. Before I do, I want to mention also that we have Family Day event coming up on February 21st. So from 1 o'clock to 4 o'clock, we are still doing in-person Family Day, as if all goes well. And so join us for Home on the Range. It's a Western theme. You can come dressed in your Western wear and have all sorts of fun family activities. Kids can make a toy hobby horse and they can race it outside. We will do some outdoor tours of Heritage Square. We will have a rope maker set up, and of course we have On the Mark Photography doing photo booth. So I am going to pass it over to Suzanne, and Suzanne can do her introduction and promotions on what's going on with the Red Deer Arts Council.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out this evening. We're really excited to have Megan here speaking with us with regards to landscape art and art history. So it can't go wrong with that. Yes, the Arts Council, we have lots of things going on right now. We actually just launched our scholarship and awards earlier this week. So we have 5 scholarships for students from high school to university and college age. We also have 2 awards for practicing artists who are developing either they're emerging artists or developing visual artists. Doesn't mean you can't be developing when you're late in your career. If you want to keep on growing, those awards are open to you. You can find out all that information on our website, reddeerartscouncil.ca, and I will plug in some of the links into the chat. Additional to that, we actually have a call for musicians going on right now, so please feel free to share that with your music friends and colleagues. It is a juried competition of sorts. Just we want to make sure that everybody's reviewed by a jury of peers. And we'll be having a lot of those concerts coming out this summer as part of our In the Neighborhood concert series, and maybe some other events throughout the city as well. What else do we have? We have the How Does Your Garden Grow exhibition on at the Red Deer Public Library downtown. It features lovely hats designed and created by Margaret Hall. And Margaret is a local milliner and wet felted wool artist. She works in textiles in a lot of ways, and she's absolutely lovely. I love her accent. She's joins us from overseas, but her Scottish accent and some beautiful knitting that she was wearing at her First Friday. So we have her again for First Friday on February 4th. There's going to be a bunch of different galleries hosting events that weekend. We also have the Central Alberta Theatre is presenting the show called Fully Committed. It is a Broadway smash hit foodie satire. It features one actress playing 27 different roles, and it's going to be a wonderful dinner theater experience. That opens this Friday night, and their tickets are available at centralalbertatheatrereddeer.com. And we also we're getting involved with 2 other events that are happening in the city. The first one will be February 25th and 26th. We have the ACFA, or the Association Canadienne Française de l'Alberta, so the French Canadian Association, is hosting a winter carnival. So we will be having, maple taffy on the snow, a bunch of different activities. You can, play spoons, enjoy pea soup. All of those sorts of different items will be available, and experiences, snowshoeing and more down at Bower Ponds. That's Friday the 25th and Saturday the 26th of February. And last but not least, we have the Community Power of One, which will be happening at Red Deer Polytechnic sometime, I believe it's March 21st or thereabouts. And that's an event to help counter racism that might be experienced in our community, and to grow our ability to stand strong when situations arise, so that we can be better neighbors to those around us. So we are very excited and very pleased to be able to help present this show. I will let Lynn do the official introduction for Megan, but thank you so much for your time. You have a great evening and enjoy this session.
Thank you, Suzanne. It's always great to hear about what's going on in the community. There is so much to do and see in Red Deer, which makes it such an exciting place to live. So I am going to introduce Megan. Megan Bylsma is Alberta born and raised. She started on a path that led places she could never have imagined when she enrolled in the BFA transfer program at the Red Deer College, now Red Deer Polytechnic. Determined to learn how to draw, she achieved that goal while discovering a passion for the stories that build the foundations of art history. She followed the signs, she trudged the roads, and after journeying through the University of Lethbridge, where she received her BFA in Art History and Museum Studies Sciences, she knew getting her Master of Art in Canadian Art History from Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario, was not her final destination. Fueled by the dream that has been sparked in the lecture halls of her college classes, she returned to Red Deer to fulfill her dream to teach art history at RDC. And I think the art history topic is a popular one, so thank you everybody who has joined us. I see lots of names. I see there's 27 people that are here tonight, and thank you for joining. So we're looking forward to hearing this talk from Megan. And after Megan does her presentation, we will be hosting a Q&A. So please put your comments in the Q&A. You can put them in during. What I will do is I will read them out and Megan will answer them. So if you have any questions, please respond at the end. We'll have time for that. So right now, I want to turn it over to Megan. Thank you very much. And we look forward to hearing your talk.
Thank you, Lynn. Thank you, Suzanne. I'm so excited to be here. And so just like, thank you for having me. I am really excited. I'm going to try to tone this down. Really excited to be able to spend the evening here talking to you all about some of the things that I get really excited about when it comes to art history. And this one way to look at landscapes and how that has influenced us in our lives today. It's a web that I love to weave. So I am just really excited. And I just want to thank the MAG and the Red Deer Arts Council for welcoming me here. And let's get on this road. We're gonna take it out. But first of all, let's find a piece of paper or your mobile device, and we're gonna take a pause right at the beginning, and I'm gonna get you to draw something. You don't have to show anybody what you draw. This is just for you, and we're gonna look at it. And by we, I mean you are going to look at it this evening as we talk about, and so I'm literally saying, I welcome you doodling this entire time. But the thing that you draw should be an outside scene, something outside. I'm not going to tell you what to draw. It can be anything you like, but it needs to be outdoors. And it can be as artistic or as stickman, which is also artistic, just telling a secret there. But it can be as much of a doodle as you want, or it can be as fancy as you want. Totally your call. It's your piece. It's sort of like Kurt Vonnegut. He told a high school class once, make something just for you, and just know that you have pride in making something that was for you that's of good quality. So you get to pick the quality, because I'm not Kurt, so you can just outside scene, because this is our theme. We're going to be looking at the landscape, and I'll tell you more. So we live in Canada, or I do. I guess any of you could be from anywhere. And if I or you or anyone asks someone, what's Canadian art? Ultimately, the thing that comes forward is that Canadian art is landscapes. It has something to do with the land. You might name a few artists. There might be specific pieces that sort of come to mind. But ultimately, the land is going to show up. And even so, I asked Google. Like, Google, what is Canadian art? And so I've searched Canadian art, and this is a screenshot of what I came up with. And we're not wrong when we ask our family, colleagues, or friends what is Canadian art, and they're like, I think it's landscapes. It seems like the official genre of art for Canadians isn't portraits, it's not history paintings, it's not grand events that happened in history. We tend to say that Canadian art is the landscape. And so pieces that are part of the Canadian landscape are things like this. This is by Carol Spando from 2011, so pretty contemporary piece. And it gets included in the Google search because it literally has in the title that it's Canadian art, Laurentian landscape, Quebec winter scene. And so a few of the pieces that were in that Google search screen were actually by this artist because of how they labeled them. But Canadian art, Canadian scene, nice reflective water, a couple of trees, aerial hills, nice, you can see there's some chunky paint on there. Canadian art, winter scenes, Canadian winters. But then there's things that are iconic pieces, things that are very, very famous, like the Jack Pine by Thompson. In 1916, he's painting in Ontario, and he becomes a legend in the few short years that he's creating artwork. And we still see this art as something that is part of the fabric of our Canadian identity. And then others are like this, Algoma County, another Ontario scene by Lauren Harris from about 1945. And here we have really beautiful rhythm of dark and light. You have these sort of spire-like dark trees against the fall yellow colors as it creates this like musical rhythm going into the background, into again those aerial hills. You've got a couple of these deciduous trees sort of in the front that have lost their leaves, and they're making a nice screen that sort of shelters you, the viewer, from this vast wilderness, but also allows you to peek through. You're being let in on a beautiful secret, but because of this screen, you're not required to survive here. And so you've got some nice reflective water. There's nice spots in this musical rhythm where you can rest, and it's a lot like music. Another Lorne Harris scene from earlier in his career, from around the 1920s, Montreal River. And here again, you have aerial hills, but these aerial hills have a nice like post-impressionist sort of brushiness to them and beautiful colors. I really love the colors in this background. And then again, you have some nice contemplative water and another screen of trees. It seems that in this particular Google search, Lorne Harris and screens of trees sort of go together. But this is again a Canadian scene. And then there's other artists who are famous in maybe smaller circles, like Levine Flexo. He was a painter in the mid-century, tended to travel, he's sometimes called a hobo artist, tended to travel around the Canadian prairies and into the central eastern provinces, painting pieces like this. And so there's a very different technique here, but again, you have this like hilly, mountainous background, trees on either side. This time there's a nice deer in the center and a sort of a volume where you can just like, wow, that valley goes on forever. These are sort of the Canadian scenes that we're very used to seeing. And if we ask, okay, who are Canadian painters? Who are famous painters of Canada from the past? We're going to say the Group of Seven and their associates. And they create paintings like this that you can see here. This is Terra Sauvage by Eli Jackson, painted in about 1913. This is of the Cambrian Shield. So again, the Ontario sort of side of the country. And these sorts of paintings created a real sense of identity, unity, the idea that there was something staunchly Canadian, that there was something that Canadians could be proud of in their country because of the things that the Group of Seven were painting. And the Group of Seven were making paintings about the land. Now, who was the Group of Seven? They were a group of 7 Canadian artists who believed that if they just directly interacted with the land, this would allow them to invent a completely unique Canadian style of art, something that was Canadian in every fiber of its being rather than derivative of something else. And so these 7 men were A.Y. Jackson, J.E.H. MacDonald, Arthur Lismer, Lorne Harris, Frederick Varley, Franklin Carmichael, and Frank Johnston. And each one of these men came from Ontario, and they ended up traveling the country as they painted art. And they really wanted to create a Canadian scene. Almost all of them had met in their younger years working at the same advertising agency called The Grip. At one point, they end up living together, not all 7 of them, but sort of a mix and match situation as they were batching it in. They would live in a what they called a hut or a shack on the back of what they called wilderness property. Now, if you want to know the super secret about that, is the wilderness property that they talk about was actually one of their dad's estates that was in Rosedale, Toronto. So maybe not so wildernessy, but hey, maybe 1912 things were different in Toronto than they are now, that's for sure. Emily Carr and Tom Thompson are usually considered along with these as part of this movement, but they were never official parts of the group. Tom Thompson, unfortunately, passed away before the Group of Seven fully coalesced, and Emily Carr was female, and she also lived on the West Coast. And so between those 2 massive distances, she was included as a similar artist, but she wasn't part of the Group of Seven. Plus, if there was more than 7 people in it, they couldn't call it the Group of Seven. So they had to keep it to 7. Now, these are considered to be the makers of quintessential Canadian art. We still will go back to this 100 years later and say this is Canadian art. And the Group of Seven claimed that they only had inspiration from the land and that they had rejected all forms of European tradition. They had moved on from their training. And so the question really becomes, is that true? Did they really leave behind all of their European training? Is it possible, as someone who has been steeped in a tradition of learning, to unlearn all of the things and look at things in a completely unique way? So let's take a look at some of their art. There's 6 of these artists here. Seventh one didn't fit on the screen, so I didn't put them in. And so we're going to do a little bit of something that in art history is called slow looking, but we're not actually going to look as slow as we would in slow looking exercises, because that can mean that you spend about 20 minutes looking at one painting. And we're not going to do that, but we're going to just sort of look at these pieces. Eli Jackson, Nellie Lake from 1933. Just take a look, see what things are there. And then with the Fred Barley piece. And as you go through each of these images, look to see what you're seeing. And because the human brain loves to find patterns, then I challenge you, after you've looked for a little bit, to see start to identify what are repeated elements. We're really good at finding patterns, what isn't the same, what is the same. And so in this case, look for what's the same. What is the thing or things that repeat in each of these pieces, whether it's the stormy weather in the Georgian Bay by Varley, or the ocean shower gleam, Mirror Lake, the Fire Ranger, or the afternoon sun on Lake Superior. What are the elements that are similar across all of these? And sometimes it's, oh, they use similar colors, but oftentimes it's all of these pieces, except for one, have trees. All of these pieces, except for one, feature clouds. All of these pieces feature water. And then start looking at, well, how's the backgrounds handled? They all have hills of some kind. And so these are repeated things, and these are all different artists. They're all painted at kind of different times. They're all sort of within a 10-year span of each other, maybe 13-year span of each other, but it's not like these artists are copying each other, because each piece is very unique to their individual artist. And looking at Eli Jackson's stuff, it can be really interesting to realize that Eli Jackson had a cousin who lived in Lethbridge, Alberta. And so he came to Lethbridge all the time. And he would spend time drawing there as he visited his cousin. And the drawing club that is still to this day in Lethbridge was founded by Eli Jackson. So there's connections across the land with these landscapes, with the people who made them, and these histories that we talk about that sometimes seem to be historical. They're events that happened in the past that have no bearing, but they kind of do. Okay, so if we're going to understand how the group of seven did the group of seven, was it possible for them to fight through all of the training that they had? They were trained artists, they were trained advertising men. Were they able to drop the European art techniques that they had learned? And to be able to answer that question, to explore it in any way, we need to go back to the the late Victorian, the early Victorian, late Georgian period, looking at the late 1700s, early 1800s in England, and see what's going on there, because it turns out there's something that's happening in that time frame that starts a ball rolling, that continues to roll. And we need to go back to this late Georgian period, see what's fighting over there. So at this turn of the century, the late 1700s, early 1800s, the British in arts and in literature and in theater, they're obsessed with romanticism. This is capital R romanticism, so it's not the ideas of romantic love, although that may feature. Romanticism was the idea of excitement, I guess, is one generic way to put it. It's a major art movement in England during the dawn of the Victorian age. And so this is a movement that brings us art like this. This is a piece by John Mad Martin called The Bard. And this piece is full of drama, and it draws you into deep space, and there's like this wilderness, and then you've got like castle-y ruins. This isn't your day-to-day life. It doesn't really matter where you live in 1817. You're not living here. But this is a movement that rejects the idea of human control over nature. Previous movements had been really all about how much humans could control everything. And in response to that, the Romantics were like, humans can't control anything. The humans can't fight against a storm. Humans can't fight against all of this distance and wilderness. And that was frightening. And so this was also about engaging the senses in the idea of the sublime. And so this is probably where, as an art history instructor, I should probably make some really corny jokes about how sublime means that it's, less than stellar lime pie or something because it's sublime. I'm so sorry, I cannot help myself. But really, the sublime is with a capital S. It's not really about limes at all. It's about emotion. It's about that tantalizing terror. It's like when you're watching a scary movie, but you're safe in your pajamas, wrapped in a blanket, eating popcorn, and you hear a noise in the house, but it's in that person's house that you're watching on the TV, and you get a little scared, but you know that you're safe. That's sort of what the Sublime is like, but they didn't have TV and movies in the early 1800s, and so they went to look at art. And they also read books, because this painting that we're looking at, 1817, it is being painted almost the exact same time that Mary Shelley is writing her Frankenstein. And so this modern idea of this like sublime, the horror, this crisis of nature and humans being wrapped up in it is really part of the moment. Eventually, because it's so dramatic, it's so melodramatic, it falls out of favor in England and realism takes over. But romantic art, like romantic literature, like Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, leaves a really lasting impact. And it's because that, like, once revealed, the sublime can't really be completely ignored. Once you've engaged with an experience that was kind of scary but also exciting, like downhill skiing or whatever your adrenaline rush is, where you know that you're safe, but there's the element where, what if? It can't be completely ignored. It's something that humans will go back to. And so the sublime tends to be something that will pop up again and again in art, especially when emotion needs to be expressed. And so you can see, like, this piece here contains so many elements of that emotional side of things. You've got the soaring eagle, you have this bard, but then he's like barding, singing, potentially, down on the troops that are down at the bottom of the image. And then you've got like gnarly trees and the castle, and it's very medieval, but sublime work tends to be. But it's also, you've got this lofty mountain grandeur. And there's phrases that we use in our 21st century that have their roots back in these feelings. This sort of landscape painting lent itself to the idea that nature could be wild. It was unfettered. And in the face of that nature, humans felt anxiety. And so this was an homage in some ways to nature's power, but it was definitely not a conservation movement. It was all about the human frailty in the face of nature's awesome force. But the only reason that it caught on so much in Britain is because landscape was already part of a really old tradition. So folding in the sublime into a tradition that already existed was very, very possible. The British had a really unique relationship, especially considering the French relationship with landscape and the Dutch relationship with landscape was very different to what the British had. And so before they turned their landscapes into emotional vistas during the Romantic movement, they were making pieces like this. So this is Thomas Gainsborough's piece, Mr. and Mrs. Andrews, probably one of the more famous landowner portraits. And so they have this relationship with owning land, and previous to the Victorian period, sort of peaking in the Georgian, but definitely even happening beforehand, there was this idea that landowners, there was extensive landowner laws, and they were really, really old. And they applied to anyone who owned land, whether it was the king or people like the Andrews here. And so people like the Andrews, they would have a deed for their land, but not everyone could read. And so if you hung your deed for your land on your wall, not everyone would be able to say that, notice that it says this marker to this marker from here to there, this is the land that belongs to the Andrews. But everyone could understand painting. And so they would commission a painting that would show their land holdings. And many times, especially in the case of artists like Gainsborough, the landowners would be included to say this land belongs to these people. And so the tradition of painting land as a legal but not legal contract, it was like a deed, but not actually a deed, because they would have actually had a deed, but it was like a common deed. And I think today, probably the equivalent would be, when I was a kid, there were people who had acreages or farms, and oftentimes on their mantle or hanging in the hall would be an aerial photograph of their property that had been taken by an airplane. And very similar sort of traditions happening there that echo each other. The idea of the landowner's portrait, where oftentimes the portrait is the land itself. And the idea in Britain of painting land you owned or having land that you owned painted for you was a way of sort of laying that claim and making it into a very plain language. And this is a really old tradition, and it holds fast as they move forward through history, as the empire grows. This is something that they recognize as an understandable way of laying claim to land and having proof that they own it, that they see it, that it belongs to them. So by the early 1800s, landscape is everywhere. It is in politics, all the way through basically everything into art theory. And so in politics, we have the doctrine of discovery, which really comes into play in Canada, in Australia, manifest destiny, which comes into play in what becomes the United States. You have the political dictates of terra nullius, which is the idea of the null land, or land that is uninhabited, never inhabited, or inhabited by a dying race. Terra nullius comes into major play for Canadian and again for Australian Commonwealth as well. And so these sorts of things become incredible parts of the political scheme of how the British Empire operates and what is going on with them. And then in the art side of things, you have people like Reverend Gilpin, who are writing multiple book series about what is a landscape, how they should be painted, and what the picturesque is. And that kicks off a bunch of books and newspaper articles and all sorts of written sort of back and forth about Reverend Gilpin's ideas about the picturesque. And so Victorian, early Victorian, late Georgian society in Britain is just steeped in a tradition of landscape and their relationship to the creation of depictions of the land. So question for you is, did you ever find yourself sort of like scrolling through photos or flipping through art books and you come across a landscape piece that just does nothing for you? And you think, man, that's not good art. Like it's art, but it's not good art. But then you come across another piece, maybe it's the exact same location, like so many pictures of Lake Louise exist. And so if you come across that and you're like, this is amazing, this is great art. But you can't really put your finger on why one is good and why one isn't, but you know that you're right. And like, why are you right? You don't really, you couldn't explain, you just like, that one's better, I like it. How do you know this? And for some people, they're like, oh, I know this because of this and this, and I learned this thing, but everyone does this. How does everyone do this? And how are they right? Now, sometimes it's about the subject. So if it's a person or an activity, like if that's a picture of someone that you love in the landscape, then of course you're like, that's great art because it's a great picture of this person I love. That's an emotional sort of connection. Maybe you're like a rock climber and this is an amazing action shot of somebody ice climbing, and you can see that they have like grade A gear and you get really excited about it. That's also a different sort of emotional connection to the activity. But if the piece doesn't have any of that going on and it still resonates with you, it might be that you're unconsciously critiquing it based on familiar compositional devices, which is super fancy art talk to say that you don't know that you're doing it, but in the back of your mind, you can judge something because you already know what's good and what's not good. And you'd know because you know. So you might be like, wait, lady, wait, what are you doing? Am I saying that we as a people are culturally programmed to respond to landscape works? And I'm saying, yes, we are. The audacity of it, that we are not our own people. We're programmed by our community, by our culture, by the things that are around us. And it's true. It just is true. But also how does this happen? Because unless you have sat down and listened to me talk far too much, or have, done the stuff where you're just like, wow, this is the cultural programming behind this piece. How do you know that if that's not something that you've talked about before, looked at before, thought about before? And the answer is mere exposure effect, or familiarity principle. In psychology, this is a term that comes up when it talks about how a person who is exposed to something or someone more and more, the more that they will prefer and favor that person or thing. So if a person sees a certain animal or a certain person, they will eventually come to prefer the familiarity of that animal or person. And this happens with art. Now, these are art pieces these photographs that I'm about to show you, these are just stock photographs. They were, I didn't have to scroll much to find them. They're just there. They're just out there. And all of them are things that we could absolutely see in, the free calendars that we get from the bank. Landscape. I remember when I was a kid, I would flip through those things, looking to see if the best photo was on my month from my birthday. And really disappointed if there was a better picture that was on somebody like my brother's birthday month, because But these pictures all sort of share elements, but each one is a beautiful picture. And each one would be calendar worthy, but these pictures were literally stock photographs. They look like they could be award-winning photographs. They're great art. Some pieces maybe are better than other pieces based on what you like. Maybe you really like the color red, so the one with all of the red leaves, that one's the best. Maybe you don't really like landscapes, so the one with the red leaves is best because it has structures in it. That could also be something that drives the sense of what you like, what you don't like. But each one of these pieces has some similarities too. They all have sort of this haze happening in the background as you get into the aerial perspective. They all have sort of a framing wilderness in the front. Even the one that has a city space, you look like you're peeking into it from a rather wild spot. Trees factor in as framing or screening devices, and water is featured. And so the one that has the beautiful framing in the red, that one does have quite an urban scene, but the way that it's taken, it seems like it's unpeopled. It's not screaming at you that this is full of people. This is the city. You're now in the city. You get ready to pay at the toll booth. It's just a beautiful construction of composition. And those pieces are very, very contemporary, but people have been making art like that for centuries. These are pieces that were done in the late 1700s, early 1800s by the premier landscape artists of the time. Reverend Gilpin, like I said, he was talking about landscape art all the time. He wasn't necessarily the biggest landscape painter at the time, but he was the loudest. And John Robert Cousins, he is a British landscape painter who goes to Italy and spends most of his time painting landscapes in Italy. And so like Lake Albano and the Lake of Albano and the Castle Gandolfo, these are both pieces that he's painted outside of Britain, but he's still a British artist looking at the things that are sort of part of his heritage. And so these pieces might be less eye-catching because they're not colored photographs, but there's something interestingly and eerily familiar to them. And so that near exposure effect is something that has been happening for hundreds of years. We've been looking at these images, and it seems that we have an insatiable appetite for images like this, where there's a landscape that's so wild. And so in this Cousins piece, there is actually a tiny little man in the bottom left-hand corner, but he's so not the focus. It's this tree that brings that curve that draws the eye into that yellow sun, and then you look at the castle and then the ocean, and then because of the curve, it brings you back in, and you sort of circularly go around this image, and there's something wild and exciting, but it's also comfortable and familiar in a way, and probably it doesn't look like this anymore, so it can be familiar because we know it. Here's another one. This is another piece that has that comfort, that familiarity to it, and what I've been sort of flogging all this time is that there are compositional elements that belong in a kind of landscape that we are very familiar with. And that kind of landscape is called the picturesque. And so there are rules, and there are rules because Reverend Gilpin said they were rules, because he said that the picturesque is a kind of landscape. It is a compositional study of the land. And there are other ways to draw the landscape, but for him, the picturesque was what he felt was the best, the stable. And we're going to talk about why he felt that in a minute, but there are other ways to do landscapes. However, when you live in a place where you have lots of hills, you have lots of trees, and there's a good amount of water, this tends to be one of the ways that we go. So the rules of a picturesque is that there are aerial perspective mountains or hills in the background. So this one has that, check. There's going to be a bright central point with a body of water in the center ground. And so sometimes, all of these rules can be somewhat interchangeable, but generally speaking, there's going to be a water feature somewhere. It's not going to be a tumultuous ocean because that's a seascape. That's a different thing. It's going to be bright, calm, safe, but not, it's not a swimming pool. You need to be careful. In the front, you'll have a foliage or a tree screen. So either you'll have a screen that blocks you so you can look through it, but you're not part of it, or there'll be trees on either side that sort of frame it so it focuses your attention down the center. This one uses the bushy screenage. You're going to have a rubbled or unmanicured foreground. It's probably usually really dark in light so that you don't pay much attention to what's happening at the bottom of the painting. So you'll look at the bright point that's right in the center. These are all part of the rules for this genre. And then the artist could include ruins or calm animals. That was totally acceptable. But you're not going to have skyscrapers or the modern equivalent in the 1790s for what a skyscraper would have been. And no people. Now, there can be people. Like I said, every rule that I've said, it can be switched out for another. So no people, but if there are people, they're not the main point and they're at leisure. So when we looked at that Cousins piece just before this, there was a tiny man in the corner. He wasn't the sower who was, sweating in the sun and growing crops for his family. He's not the point. He's just a little person there to help the composition along. At leisure, seemed quite happy. So, and if they do end up working, like if they're wood cutting or something, then they should be doing it in a leisurely and happy way. These aren't social change images. They're not ones that are to be challenging in a way that looks at humanity, because they're not about humans. They're about nature and nature's control or nature's wildness in the face of humans. And everything really should be looking quite unkempt. There should be nothing that looks quote unquote civilized, in that it shouldn't be under control. These need to be virgin vistas, not downtown New York City. Although the rule can apply to downtown New York City, and it also applies to Banff. This is a Rocky Mountain landscape by Albert Burstad of 1870. This is an American scene. And now Albert Burstad is an artist. He's a Swiss German who immigrates to the United States and then becomes a really well-known artist down there. And he has quite a history with the landscape. And he's one of the reasons that Yellowstone Park became a national park. So these artists in their landscape painting, they do have effects on land conservation, but it really wasn't the first thing that they were doing. This is another picturesque composition. And the picturesque was one way to create a romantic landscape in the late 1800s, late 1700s. It was the middle choice on a spectrum of dramatic representation. And so the least dramatic of the three different kinds of representation was the pastoral. So pastoral landscape was a genre of well cared for and generally peopled lands. So you have artists that are making pieces about like farmers plowing turnips in Slough. And so you have your peaceable workers and your happy cows, and it's a peopled landscape, maybe a nice village in the distance. But this is a well cared for land. And so this is something that's probably more related to the landowner paintings like we saw by Gainsborough. They're beautiful and they're calm. The picturesque was, as I said, titled by Reverend William Gilpin, and he felt that the picturesque fell between the beautiful, which was the pastoral, and the sublime with its unspoilt and virgin vistas. And it was emotionful, but it wasn't overwhelmingly emotionful. The sublime were works that pushed the rules of the picturesque beyond the realm of the unspoilt into the definition of the uncontrolled. So these pieces would give awe and tantalizing fear, as humanity's insignificance in the face of unbridled nature was the goal of stormy and sweeping scenes of grandeur. And so with Burstad's work, he walks the line between the sublime and the picturesque. And each piece that he paints sort of is right on the edge and sometimes pushes right over to the sublime. This piece, it's very picturesque in the front, but the further you go into that cloud, you have more sublime happening. Now, this German-American painter was well known for his sublime landscapes, and he created many of them as part of the westward expansion. He was part of the crews that were going west, the saying, "Go west, young man, go west," all part of the Manifest Destiny mandates of the United States in this mid-1800s. And so that's why this piece is painted the way it is, why there's a storm on the left-hand side, which represents the west, and there's peace and calm coming in from the right-hand side, which represents the east. While he is documenting the land that he sees for posterity, he's also talking about the westward expansion of the so-called civilized east moving into the so-called unsettled west. And so his pieces are generally full of this kind of symbolism, which was why the top part of this painting is so full of this overwhelming awe. because they're talking about a really big idea at the top, whereas the bottom is really more of his documentation of what he sees. And really, a lot of Burstad's work, he's documenting every leaf, every stick, every animal, every rock as an inventory. He's traveling with the military. But his pieces are still amazing because of his ability to paint light. And so this is the one thing that really draws the difference between someone who can just paint a landscape and someone who can paint a landscape. And it's often how they can deal with light. And the picturesque needs to have someone who has that real honed skill in the how the light is handled, because the light and dark is what draws your eye through the composition and creates that sense of interest. But Reverend Gilpin, like I said, he published so many books on the sublime, and he was one of the, he was a minister for the Church of England. He was also a school teacher, but he also spent a lot of time traveling around and making travel journals, which he would then publish. And so this created a good area of time where people could like talk about the picturesque, they could make fun of the picturesque. It was a common enough known thing that they could have these conversations. So Thomas Rollinson, who was known for comics and cartoons, he published an entire poem that was illustrated, a book. Often it would be broken down into excerpts that would be published in the newspaper, but also the book could be purchased quite cheaply. And it was the tour of Dr. Syntax in search of the picturesque. In 1812, he's writing this. So this is again around the same time that Mary Shelley's Frankenstein is being written. John Mad Martin is painting his super sweeping scenes. So there's a lot of conversation about landscape painting in Britain right now. And so here you have your titular character, Mr. Syntax, Dr. Syntax, as he is looking for the perfect space to get his perfect composition for the picturesque. And he's not paying attention to where he's going. So he trips over the rocks, falls over backwards. His hat and wig have fallen off in the water, and he's about to follow. His horse is a little bit distressed looking, which he should be, because later in the story, the horse gets sold because Syntax gets robbed. It's just an entire long epic adventure. And him falling in the water is probably the least of his worries, because he doesn't have really great luck at all. But it wouldn't be funny if he had good luck. It's sort of a comedy, sort of a social satire in some ways. But Dr. Syntax becomes a very popular character, so much so that Rollinson creates 3 different story arcs for this character, and it makes a very good amount of money. But pieces like this are also being made. This comes from a couple years later. It's 1821, a super famous painting by John Constable called The Haywain. Here it's more pastoral. You have people, but they're not leisurely, but they don't seem stressed out. You have your mid-ground water. You have your framing trees, you have your skies. He doesn't follow every rule of the picturesque, but he would have been well aware of the rules of the picturesque. But at this point in time, by the 1820s, you're deep in the throes of the Industrial Revolution. And so the landscape becomes also important, not for landowners, although it's still important, not for ways to have great emotions, although that's still important. It's also a way to practice nostalgia, because the landscape doesn't look like this. There's coal mines everywhere. There's coal smoke everywhere. Nothing looks like it did when John Constable was a child. So he's painting the spaces that he knew as a kid, but now as an adult. And he's an artist who never leaves Britain. He always paints scenes in Britain. He stays close to home. He was friends with the Bishop of Salisbury Cathedral, and so he paints a number of paintings of this church. Some of them moving towards the sublime. Yes, this is peopled, and it looks somewhat pastoral, but there's that storm coming in and the rainbow, and then you have that tree right on the dead tree, almost dead tree, on the right hand side. It allows you to not get lost in the meadow that's there, and it's a really smart compositional device, because you've got the big tree on the one side and the little tree on the other side, which then bounces your eye to the rainbow and the amazing clouds and the cathedral. And you have these horses standing in the water, which is a John Constable thing. If there's horses, they're basically always standing in the water with this guy. And so this is taking the picturesque and making it his own. He's making it peopled. It's not an untouched vista, but he's still using those elements for something that's a little more pastoral, with elements of, oof, don't know, that storm looks pretty bad. And then there's Jmw Turner. He He's known for his seascapes. He really enjoyed light and emotion, but he also did landscapes. And so here you have Glacier and source of the Avernon going up to the Mer de Glace. And here you have a mountain scene that takes the rules of the picturesque. And yes, there's goats here, but they're really not this topic. The topic is the glacier and the clouds in the background. And by this point in time, and eventually as this artist continues, things get, sort of brushier and fuzzier as they go. So this background is very aerial perspective. It looks very, that distance is there. And so this is a space that you can walk into, but you're going to have to hike. And this is the really great thing about talking about landscapes, is you can talk about if you can go into that space or if you're not welcome in that space, or if you can look at that space, but there's no way in. And it just depends on how the artist invites you. This one, it invites you, but you're going to have to climb like a mountain goat. This is another constable, the Vale of Dedham. And here again, it's a pastoral scene. You can see that there's a town in the background, but you've got that shining middle water. You've got the aerial hills. Constable's known for his clouds. He thought clouds were the chief organ of sentiment, as he said. And so he studied them scientifically. And so the clouds that you're looking at, they look great because he knew clouds as a scientist. Like this was his thing. And he felt that his paintings were largely overlooked because they looked like things that people remembered the countryside looking like. So the picturesque composition was adopted by many artists in England, as we've seen, but also out of England. And it spread throughout. It went to Germany, it went to France, it ends up in many places as it brings a whole new set of ideas to people who are looking at the landscape in different ways. It was a composition design that allowed the image to be, infused with emotional weight, that you could have a landscape that was a recognizable place, but also made the person looking at it feel things, and based on the fact how nature was acting and reacting. And it still persists as a cultural, if really unconscious sometimes, choice in art composition by people in places that share a British cultural influence. And so, obviously this is in Britain, and so this is the cultural influences of that particular land. But then there's pieces like this. This is by a contemporary American artist by the name of Erin Hansen. And she's best known for her amazing color palette choices and for the style of painting called Open Impressionism. And Open Impressionism is a painting technique where she lays really thick brushstrokes or impasto on her canvas, and she doesn't layer them. And so it creates sort of a mosaic effect between the underpainting and these thick globs of paint on top. That's an art movement or an art style that she started. But even some of her works, which are more known for her art style, she still uses a composition that is picturesque in some of her pieces. And even scenes that are so very not British looking like this. Reverend Gilpin would probably never have believed that the rules that he invented in the late Georgian period would be paired with such pure color abandon. I don't know that he would approve, but it is his compositional device that's being sort of put in a blender, reapplied to the canvas. But now you have, coral colored mountains, and you have indigo and teal colored water and purple ground. These are all, it's a beautiful, but it's also a picturesque composition. So the picturesque doesn't have to be rooted in late Georgian fashion. It can be part of the contemporary look. And it's really quite versatile, even though it has its set of 5 or 6 rules. So this brings us to the question, did the group of 7 abandon their European training? Were they influenced by European art? And my response would be that they kind of have to be. How could they abandon something that was part of their exposure, their familiar exposure? They would be drawn to things that they were familiar with. And so I'm very careful to not say that they were lying when they said that we're making art that is not European. They may have fully believed that, not recognizing that they were applying. Even at this piece here by Tom Thompson, you can see that there's the hills in the background, you've got a screening tree, you have water in the middle ground, you've got a rocky foreground, like you've got it all here. But it is also an icon of Canadian painting. It's a different color palette, different art style than Gilpin would have seen, but these are still parts of this older tradition. And it's not super unusual that they would use this sort of device to make what would be seen as good art, because Canada as a nation has a tradition of using land as a way to bind the country together. It's a big space. It covers a lot of different things. Different things is like, you know, you've got coast to coast, to mountains to prairies. You've got tundra. You've got, you know, a desert. There's all sorts of things going on. And so by using the variety of land, they often have, as a culture, have pulled together based on the fact that our land is different, but our people can be united. And so by digging into what that means in Canada for the landscape, in Canada, they have been using since Confederation, they used the landscape painting to be a legal claim to land that was taken in breach of British law. They would use the landscape painting to call the diverse and wide-set settlers of the country together. They would also use it to advertise the region's rich natural resources and their how alluring there could be adventures. And so landscape painting, then landscape art, then landscape photography, landscape video, all of these things are traditionally used across our country as part of our national heritage. Now, the group of seven, they were a group with a purpose. Their purpose, they're like, you know what, we need to make Canadian art. And so for them, this Canadian art had to be autochthonic, which is a very difficult word to spell because no word has a ch, th, but this one. But it means native, it means born of the land itself. And it's very specific that it means literally from the geographical dirt. And so when people would talk about the group of seven, they would often use words like Indigenous and Native as ways to describe this new national art. And for the group of seven, they also said it needed to be free of outside European influences, and that if people appeared, which is actually very rare in group of seven pieces, they could never be First Nations and they could never be French Canadians. And so as a result, they travel by boxcar across the Canadian provinces towards the west, because the CP rail had just been completed from coast to coast. And so they were given the option to ride in a boxcar that they could fit with a stove and bunk beds, and they could use that as their command center as they would document the wilderness. And they didn't have to do that. This is a very sort of like transient way to travel. They could have afforded to travel not in a boxcar, but this was also part of the adventure. They would get to see the land, they would get to experience the land in very different ways. And so they trundle across the landscape in their very famous train. So over 100 years after Reverend Gilpin makes the rules for the picturesque on an entirely different continent, those same rules are being applied over and over again, maybe not even on purpose, to make highly sought after art, because the group of seven's art people loved it. I know that the group of seven has the sort of there's the idea that they were hated during their lifetime, but they really weren't. Yes, they got a few haters who are just like, this is bad art, but it's sort of like an internet forum. Most people will like it, and then a few people won't, and those few people who don't are the loudest. It's kind of what went on with the group of seven. And they were doing this to also create art that would strengthen cultural heritage. And then over 100 years after the group of seven, there's landscape artists in Canada that are still applying Reverend Gilpin's rules to their own art, and they are becoming part of a tradition about celebrating the land we share, creating change, and reminding us of what binds us together. And those can be seen in places like the exhibitions that are at the Meg right now. The Yahatinda, the ranch photography, the subject of these tends to be the horses, but sometimes when a subject is a thing like a horse, that emotional aspect, because horses tend to be such vehicles of emotion. They're beautiful and all of the things, they have such a center in art. Sometimes the landscape can also be picturesque behind them, and sometimes it doesn't need to be, because the topic isn't land and the untamedness of the land. Sometimes it's about the wild nature of the horse or the gentleness of the horse. And then in the exhibition Our West Country, this is the perfect sort of exhibition to look at and be like, okay, is this a picturesque painting, or is this a different kind of landscape? And so it's this sort of experience with both of these, that you get to experience what is a picturesque painting and what are other ways to approach the picturesque. And so this is one of the installation shots that the Meg shared on Instagram of the West Country exhibition. And so I really enjoyed including this, because it's just glimpses of what's in the gallery, and you can see they're amazing landscape paintings. And as you look, some of them have some of the rules of the picturesque and some of them don't, but they're still amazing. They draw you in, they invite you places, they show you things. And this is the great language of the landscape, is it's because we live on planet Earth. Oftentimes a landscape can speak to us in ways that nothing else would, because it's something that we are familiar with, whether we recognize our familiarity or not. It's still something that we know. So if you're feeling still a little bit skeptical, if you're like, Megan, I think you cherry picked your examples and it feels a little bit like we're like making some stuff up. It's like the search for Pepe Sylvia. There's just you're weaving a web here. I don't really believe you. It's okay. You don't have to. I did cherry pick my examples. There's just a lot of examples out there. It would have been incredibly overwhelming if I hadn't. So I do defend myself there. But it is a little bit. But this is the great thing about art history, is that is what art history is. It weaves things in. It cuts things open. It lets you see the layers. It reveals things about our humanness and about our communication with each other. And art history is this thing where it's the stories of the past, but it's illustrated. And so it is a little complicated and a little bit woven together in this tapestry of wonderfulness. But if you're not convinced, take a look at I'm apparently very obsessed with the search results of Google things, because this is the Google results. If I just was like, okay, let's do like travel Alberta. What are advertisers doing for, advertising to come to Alberta? And then I was like, wow, this is a lot of picturesque. There's a lot. There's also a dinosaur, which is also super cool, but I will not talk about dinosaurs, I promise. But over and over again, you can see these amazing looking landscapes that use the picturesque. Although if you look at the one that says ready, the very last one, right there, that one's not picturesque. It's a very beautiful photograph, but it's not picturesque. So as you can see, there are multiple ways to capture the landscape. This is just one of them that seems very popular for Travel Alberta. There is a video here which will not play with this technology, so we won't watch it, but that's just fine. I am going to, I don't know if this will work, but I had a plan. Don't know if the plan's going to work, but if you would like to watch this video at another time, I'm dropping it into the chat. I don't know if you'll be able to see the chat, but it is there. And this video here is a Travel Alberta advertisement for, and if you're looking for it on YouTube, it's also called Remember to Breathe. And the thing with this is it's 3 minutes of landscape in some city, but landscape stuff, showing the richness of our resources and the adventure that the land has to offer. And it's literally like, can you spot the picturesque composition, but in video? And so I was really excited about being able to show you a video that also used the picturesque. It's not just for still compositions. It can also be used for highly cinematic film. But alas, it doesn't like to screen share, so we won't be doing that. Okay, so that's the one, the title of this talk is My 5-Year-Old Draws Like That. And so far I haven't talked about 5-year-olds at all. I've just talked about this almost 250-year-old history of how one person decided the landscape was best. Now, did he invent that kind of painting? No. He just thought that was the best kind, so he wrote about it a lot. So people had actually been doing it beforehand. He was just the one who was like, I'm going to name it. However, because of mere exposure familiarity, when kids draw, sometimes they draw the things they see. And when I say sometimes, they almost always draw the things they see, whether they see it in reality or they see it in their imagination. They document things. And when I was a kid, if I wasn't drawing my family repeatedly, like I was worried I was going to forget their identity if I didn't draw it, and when I wasn't drawing pictures of bridal gowns and people in veils because they were so pretty, so obviously I needed to always draw those too. But when I got bored of those two things, this was the kind of landscape that I frequently would draw. Now, I grew up in central Alberta, which means that on the best days, if you went to a hill and you looked west, you could just see the mountains in all their majestic glory right on the edge of the horizon. And you knew it was a good day when you could go and do that and you could see that. It wasn't a good day if it was overcast or cloudy or foggy or any of those things. So it was just a few days of the year that you could go up on the hill and look, and way out there was this mountain range. So it meant that the mountains were always on the edge of my geographical identity. And that meant that they frequently showed up in my landscape drawings. And sometimes there were so many mountains, it kind of looked like a stegosaurus because they were so layered up, which I also loved. However, not all kids grow up with the mountains on the edge of their existence. In university, I had a roommate who grew up in northern Alberta. So the mountains were very foreign to her. And she said that when she drew landscapes, they had rolling hills because that's what they were familiar with. And so that familiarity concept applies not just to the art that we see, but also to the experience of the land that we have. So a child who is raised by the ocean is probably going to draw the ocean a lot more than they're going to draw a picturesque scene. But like I said earlier, where we live in central Alberta is primed for the picturesque because we've got trees that can frame, we have water, we've got mountains and hills. And of course, you got to have that oblique sunlight coming in on the one side. It's just a must for every child drawing. And so oftentimes, there isn't water in children's drawings. Oftentimes they'll draw their house. And so that quaint dwelling will have that center space. But that is developmentally appropriate because they're drawing what makes them comfortable, what gives them that feeling of security. And for adults out looking out at the nature, oftentimes that center body of water is their calm space, that calm space in all of this wilderness. But kids are often copying what they see. Like I said, every free calendar that you get from the bank, every landscape background that shows up on your computer, they can share elements of this. And so it's something that children in Canada are they're exposed to very frequently. And because they're exposed to it frequently, it becomes the good art. And so is it good art? Well, that's completely subjective. It's based on what you're familiar with because that's what you're going to prefer. And so children's art tends to reveal these things in ways that can be just sort of jarring once you see it. Which brings us to your drawings. Earlier, I asked you to draw a land. And so what elements of the picturesque do your landscapes share? Do they have aerial perspective hills or mountains? So this just means that you're sort of seeing them from either up above or sort of down below, or they're a little foggy, that aerial perspective. Do you have framing or screening trees either side or sort of covering the front? Do you have this rocky unfinished foreground? And sometimes it's just blank and that's unfinished. Do you have calm animals or humans? If you've included any of these, you have like a lion attacking a horse, then that's a different kind of romantic drawing there. Very symbolic of the monarchy against the common people. But do you have calm creatures if you have creatures? Do you have ruins or quaint buildings that in your log cabin, the smoke coming out in the mountains because you're craving some calm in a sea of not calm? Or do you have a water feature? Is there a waterfall or a nice pond? Is there a duck, a calm duck, happy duck? And you're drawing you might have drawn a desert. You might have drawn a desert and cactus and the sun beating down on the skull of a dead camel. Probably not picturesque, but it's probably also a pretty good drawing too. Alrighty, so I'm going to let you see this. This is my bibliography and further reading list. Just some of the things that I cited throughout my talk here. A lot of it just comes from these sources as well as other things along my journey. But this brings us to a close of talking about this particular topic.
Thank you, Megan. That was awesome. I think you did an excellent job of sort of giving us a really quick survey of some of the British influences of landscapes. And I love the fact that you really brought in the discussion of picturesque and sublime and pastoral. These are all terms that we've heard. And so to me, the underlying theme that I've been hearing for all of this is really landscape design. And I've always said that good art design, sort of that formal elements and principles of design, are sort of the foundational skills that all artists need to compose a good picture, whether it's a landscape picture, an abstract, or whatever. And so I'm really glad you brought that in, and that's a part of the way that you teach art history, because I think it really does talk on what's good art and what isn't. And yeah, I think that's fantastic. So I do have a few questions here while I'm waiting for others to come in. One of them is also a comment. Of course, I love the title, My 5-Year-Old Can Make That or Can Draw Like That. We've all heard that before. And quite often we hear it in reference to very formal abstract where it's paint splattered or whatever. And I think there's this misconception about design and formalist art, like all the designs and principles of elements of designs and stuff and art making. I think people have this idea that good art needs to be laborious and highly skilled, and you gave some great examples of that, and have complex processes, but sometimes it's quick and the spontaneous, like you asked us all to draw a little image. Sometimes those raw images of self-expression, and even the example of the 5-year-old, can be just as valid. And I think it all comes down to design. And I think you've nailed it when you said we can put a finger on it. We go, well, that's good and that's not good. We don't know how to describe it. We don't have the visual literacy to describe what makes it good or not, but we all inherently know that. And I think it's because we've been bombarded with good design, which is great, versus being bombarded with bad design. So I have one question for you. Now, you gave us all this information of how to look at design or landscape and define it, but you personally, how do you define good landscape design? Is it pastoral? Is it sublime? Is it something wild? Is it something new, exciting? How would you define it personally?
Okay, as an art historian, it's so difficult to switch from the like this is what the experts say to like what do you think, Megan? But for myself, I know that I love sketchy work, so drawings more than the finished paintings, and I love color. And ultimately, my love in art tends to be material. It doesn't tend to be the subject. It's how is that material used? And like, if you're using paint, does the paint like blend into each other? And can I just like look at this pool of paint? Well, there's an entire face there. I know, but look at the paint. And so oftentimes it comes down to the materiality of the final product. And if I am looking for like those amazing landscapes, they're often artist sketches. Their finished works are amazing, but only if they keep that vividness or that aliveness that is often in their original sketch. If it just seems living in some way, then I get really excited. So like the work of Hansen with her bright colors, that gets me really excited. But then there's pieces in the Meg too, where you're like, this looks like a very natural landscape, but then when you get closer, you're like, there's some electric colors in there, and that makes me so excited.
So you kind of like more of the raw expression. So I don't know if you're probably familiar with the Group of Seven, their landscape sketches when they're just out in the land before they take it back to the studio. It's more of that raw first impression, and it's very unfinished. So that's kind of the thing that you're referring to.
I get really happy with those ones.
Exactly. Excellent. Good.
I'm not a visual artist. I'm a performing artist. So there's mine. I definitely follow all of the rules, but I also stopped a lot earlier. Yeah, I mean, who doesn't have a favorite place in Canada, in Banff or Jasper National Park, where you go and it's like whenever you're meditating, that's where your brain goes, is that the happy spot. And I think that, you know, here we are in central Alberta and in Alberta as a whole, and we're just extraordinarily lucky that we have such picturesque land to be far enough away from and yet close enough to that we can experience it without it becoming the mundane everyday. And that's a really lovely aspect to it. I remember living in Jasper one summer when I was in college, and I remember needing sky when I feeling so desperate to see just like a horizon after some time in amongst the mountains. So as you say, what you are familiar with becomes the preference and such, but I will still always draw Lake Edith, which is kind of what I was going for there, with a little beach in front, because you can sit on the beach there on your way up to the Jasper Park Lodge. So yeah, I apologize. I don't have anything truly edifying to share because this is not my field of influence or study, but I thoroughly enjoy it. And I like being able to know that there's actually like picturesque, sublime, and pastoral are actual types of landscape that I can now use when I go, ooh, that's pretty, museums and so forth. Thank you very much for that. I appreciate it.
I also liked how you mentioned, Megan, about how all of these British artists and all these Canadian artists in the group of 7, they came to Canada and they had to find out their own style. And they really wanted to create the true Canadian identity, the wilderness. And could they really, truly, you know, let go of their British influence and their learning? And I think that that's very true. In art school, you learn the skills, you learn the technique, you learn the pastoral rules, the picturesque rules, you learn the elements and principles of design. And I think once you know and understand those design principles, they're ingrained in you and you can't undo them and you can't unknow them. And so I think that's the interesting influence that you're really getting at. And it was a nice comparison when you started to compare the American painters. So it was nice that you brought in, okay, here's the British influence, and now here's how the Americans interpreted it. Here's how the Canadian artists interpreted. They're all using the same rules of good design and good compositional devices in their artwork. And I'm glad that you really showed that diversity of art styles in sharing that same message. So that's excellent. I remember, I just want to share one more comment and then there's a couple questions coming in. I remember in art school, university instructor had a very good point when somebody said, okay, when they were referring to really abstract art, they said, oh, well, you know, 5-year-olds can do that. You know, what do you feel about when somebody says, oh, a 5-year-old can do that? That's not very good. And the instructor said, it all comes down to consistency. Somebody may accidentally make a good design, whether it's a good landscape or good abstract painting, but can they do it consistently? And I think that consistency in good design is really what defines good art, is that they know how to really draw your eye in and hold your attention and really compose it. And so I thought that was a really good way of describing it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So now one of the questions, do you think there are any Canadian artists who did what the group of 7 claimed to do?
So I'm going to make some assumptions in what that question means about what the group of 7 claimed to do, which is like create art that is autothotic, like straight from the ground. And I'm going to say probably yes, but they're probably not famous. Because the group of 7, look, first of all, we can't ignore the elephant in the room when talking about the group of 7, which is they were admin. They knew how to create a narrative that would become something people wanted to talk about. And this is the fascinating thing about history, is there's lots of histories we don't talk about because their stories don't vibe with us. And so their stories don't get told. And so someone who creates art straight from their experience with the dirt, basically, they're not going to have a story that is going to be one that is part of the part and parcel of, and their artwork is going to look very different than what we're familiar with. So I'm sure that people have made Canadian art that is so unique, but they're probably not selling because it doesn't have the benefit of that near exposure. There's no familiarity principle with it because it's not, we want to purchase art that we know, not art that is aggressively different. So yes, I think there is, but I don't think they're famous.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. That's good. I think also you talked about the British influence, but I was just thinking even something like a Japanese influence. If you looked at any other country, I mean, their style once again is going to be very different, but they're going to have some of those compositional devices, maybe mountains in the background, something more atmospheric, something in the foreground. So yeah, I think those influences could be anything else. The British influences on art school, I think that's a comment. Another one, do you think that Canadian art is still primarily landscapes, or do you think it has expanded?
Okay, I
Good
love
question.
this question because this was something that I'm like, oh, I really want to talk about this, but it didn't actually fit because the video didn't work. So if you watch the Travel Alberta Remember to Breathe video, it is full of picturesque vistas, like just one after another. It's amazing. And it does take your breath away, which is the point of the video, is to say we're breathtaking here. And that's what the dramatic picturesque does. But then I was like, well, how does Explore Canada, the Canadian agency of tourism, handle their videos? And it turns out that their videos are peopled. They do show quick clips of like regional areas of beauty, but then it almost always pops back to the cities, the architecture, the food, the people. And so I'm like, this is interesting. It shows a difference between the national approach to sharing the land and the regional approach. The regional approach is look at our beautiful vistas, which makes sense for Alberta. But nationally, they're like, look at the people who live in this landscape. And so, and then if you look at like further on those screens from those Google searches of famous Canadian art or Canadian art, they never really become peopled scenes, but you can tell that there's a second genre of like city streets, not portraiture, but city streets or town scenes or hockey rinks, those sort of still Canadiana, but definitely more like your rural town or your old style Toronto or that sort of thing. So yeah, I don't think it's the only. I just think that it's usually we'll say it's landscapes because we don't want to name any one city as being the center of our, art heritage.
I think also the fact that Canada is known for its extreme climates, then that is part of one of the things that creates our identity in our art. But there is definitely lots of contemporary Canadian art, very abstract art. There's, nowadays anything goes in modernist art. So just another plug for art history. Now, your background is you started in fine arts. You started with a BFA and then you went into a master's in Canadian art history. What was your turning point? Like, what was it that made you decide, okay, I don't want to be an artist anymore. I really want to just study art history.
Okay, so the first part, the turning point where it was like, I don't want to be an artist anymore, that was it was like probably the first 6 weeks of art school. We're in a drawing class and our drawing instructor sits the 20 of us down and says, basically, I hate to break it to you, but none of you are going to be famous artists that will be able to use art to primarily pay the bills. You will also need to have another job. Be prepared for this reality. Maybe one of you will be a career artist who can only do art and be able to also buy a house. And so I'm sitting there and I came to learn how to draw. I didn't do art in high school, at least not well. And I was like, I'm never going to be as good as these people here, never mind enough to sell my artwork. So I need to like broaden my horizons here. And so that was sort of the first step. But then where it became art history, that was the thing that was going to be the thing was I was studying for art history exams with friends at Red Deer College, and James Trevelyan was a storyteller when it came to how he explained art. And so studying was just a campfire experience of like trading stories about artists and ways to remember their artwork. And that was sort of then when after a few conversations outside of the art world where people are like, you really know this stuff, you should teach it. And too many people say something and you're like, maybe you should pay attention to this. And so by the time I went back for second year, I was like, okay, I'm going to learn to do art because I want to be able to do that for myself, but I really want to teach art history to art students. And then eventually finding out that was because it was this story-based interaction of history as a reality, people trying to communicate through time.
Excellent, thank you. I found art history was something that I love too. It was kind of my jumping off point for just learning about history and wanting to learn more about history in general. Now, as an art historian, how do you feel that this knowledge for your college students or any college students, how would learning art history improve and create a richer art studies? Like, how do you feel that learning about the styles and the movements and everything that you teach in art history, how is that going to make anybody a better artist?
It's going to do two things, and I feel really confident about my answer on this one. It's going to do two things. So first of all, on the mechanical side, it lets people know what people have done before, and also like those progressions of thought Cézanne was known for making art. He's a post-impressionist, so the sort of that turning point of the 1800s, and he was known for solving experiments. That was how he approached his artwork, that he was trying to solve experiments, like he was working through mathematical problems, but with paint and canvas. And so then another artist sees that and says, oh, I wonder what would happen if he'd been able to complete his experiments, but he passed away. So I will complete his experiments. And that's how you get Braque and Picasso inventing Cubism, because they continued that line of thought. And then as that line of thought moves, it becomes another art movement and another art movement as these bodies of knowledge are built. And so learning art history allows you to stand on the shoulders of giants, because you can look into the past and see these continuous experiments, and then you can catch the flow that fits for you. But the second side of it is that it creates a mental space where students know anyone in art practice can recognize they're not alone. They're not a solitary figure battling the elements of art fatigue. They're part of a larger community, and that is a community that has fought these same battles and have gone through things and failed and then survived and done back and forth. And so it creates this sense of confidence, because art history approaches the art, but the history, and it talks about those individuals who influence a greater culture. And it makes a person feel more grounded in the space where they are, because they're part of this giant community that has traveled through time and space, and it still communicates with them. And so it can be quite an experience to suddenly find yourself in that historical flow of all those communications, and recognizing that this space is, you can see everything from the perspective of art history. Nothing is off limits. Everything is pulled into it, and therefore everything can be pulled into an art practice.
Excellent. Well said. I find, yeah, just learning that art is a response to everything that's going on in society is another jumping off point. And yeah, thank you. I think that was an excellent answer. Okay, so there's another question here coming in. As a previous student of Megan, I can say that learning art history has just flourished my love of art, all while linking and joining historical eras which caused inspiration to different art eras. That's excellent. Yeah, that's a lovely comment. And I think it just expands our mind of what is out there globally, not just in what's in our own backyard. It can really expand our mind. Excellent. So art history is definitely a popular topic tonight. And for all these people in the audience that are listening that are probably maybe artists or non-artists, non-students and students, if you were a non-artist and you wanted to broaden your horizons and learn more about art in general, learn a little bit more about visual literacy, how to look at art, how to understand art, what would you recommend would be a good art history class to take that would be a jumping off point?
Well, mine, of course.
Great answer.
Yeah, I would say that mine are a jumping off point. There are places, any one of the ones that I teach, they're a space where that you can just jump in, and like it's like jumping in a river with all your clothes on. Yeah, it feels like you're going to drown, but you're okay when you bounce to the surface. And I feel that's the experience with like learning art. But the thing with art history is wherever you look for that, there's great things on YouTube. There's amazing blogs. There's amazing books. But there's also not amazing blogs and books and TikTok. And there's a lot of things out there that aren't great. And so just sort of like check in with how it makes you feel. Like, are you bored? It's not for you. And that's okay, because history is it's a vibrant story of people who came before. But if it's not being told that way because the focus is something else that isn't your thing, it's okay to find the thing that's your thing. And that I can say, find those books that seem like they're alive, because that's also a great jumping off point. If you can find the thing that is with your interest, don't make it drudgery, because these were people who lived. They didn't want you to drudge through their histories.
Right. Good. Yeah, it could start off with Canadian art, or it could be European art, or whatever appeals to you.
Yeah.
So another comment and question here: for those who do not find landscape paintings appealing, what would you say to encourage to those naysayers to explore landscape art? Good question.
Oh, that one's challenging. Well, I would say that there's probably two things. First of all, telling those people that it's okay that they don't like landscape art, but that's okay. there will be an art that you do like, and that's valid. Sometimes just people can be a little feisty about art because it is subjective, because we feel somehow that the things that we look at and we love, we need to share them. But if someone doesn't share them, then we feel it's very personal. And so to say it's okay if you don't like landscape art, but also, how do you feel about seascapes? Because there's more than just one kind of landscape art. There's the kind that has mountains, which I showed a lot of, but there's also tons of stormy seas, just as many as there are of stormy mountains. And so how do you feel about seascapes? And so it could be just the point that they have seen one kind and they're like, I don't love it. But maybe their familiarity is with something else and they just haven't been able to put words to it. So it can be that you can bombard them with all sorts of different kinds of landscape art to see if there's one that finally, you've tried all the cookies, but then you're like, man, that oatmeal raisin is the one I want. And people are like, okay, didn't see that coming, but alrighty. That can also be helpful as just like having that smorgasbord of art. But then also maybe what kind of art do they like? And if they're like, oh, I just really love the hyper realistic Harley, the stuff that looks like the Harley Davidson that you can just jump on. Okay, you really like industrial art, you like things that look hyper realistic. So maybe landscape isn't your thing because you like industry. So I think there's, but yeah, I would personally, I would just bombard them with different kinds of images until they said uncle.
Okay, good. Thank you. So a lot of people are signing out saying, thank you, Megan. Your presentation was very informative, thought-provoking, and captivating. Great speaker. A few other people have signed out saying, thank you very much. Great talk. And there is another question. Why is it that every decade some art critic states the landscape genre is dead? Is there a cyclic nature in tastes? Good question.
Well, I think that there's always that person who says that because it's sort of like the person who can say, hey, painting is dead, and everyone gasps and then they have the full attention. But it's true. There's always the, landscape art is a thing of the past, it's dead and gone, but it never is. And so I guess, a broken clock tells the time twice a day, right? At some point, that person is going to be correct, maybe. But it's been with us for a very long time. So, but yeah, I do feel like it's a way to catch people's attention, to make this like real, like jarring announcement and then say, this is the new kind of art. But landscape does go back and forth between like sort of the passé cliche choice of like, it's the safe art. And then, there's other, and so I think landscape is still, even now, sort of in the safe category, it's safe. But if you really dig into it, it's not safe. There are so many minefields that even in just this talk that we navigated through, because landscape is also that history of humans communicating into the future, and they have some gnarly ideas.
I think maybe they think it's dead just because of the familiarity of it. They're looking for something new and they're still seeing the same familiar compositional devices and a variety of styles, but no real dramatic change from that. Okay, well, I think that is it for questions. Thank you very much. I learned a lot. Nice work. If nobody else has any other questions, oh, just wait, there's one more in Q&A. How come landscapes talk about art? Who likes to draw? Okay, how come landscapes talk about art? Who likes to draw? That would be Edward. He's got some interesting questions. So I think most landscape artists do like to draw, because drawing is definitely the starting point of landscapes. And hopefully everybody else did a little drawing at the beginning with Megan. It was a good little icebreaker there too. Okay, well, thank you very much. We're already past 8 o'clock. This was a very enlightening and informative talk, and I appreciate all the work that you did. Thank you, Megan, and thank you for everybody for joining us. We will see you hopefully on February 23rd for Art of Jajarians.
Thank you so much, Megan. Have a great night, everyone.